The champagne glasses were catching the light just right that evening in San Francisco. Everything about the charity gala screamed expensive, from the ice sculptures to the orchestra warming up in the corner. This wasn't the kind of event where you showed up in jeans and a t-shirt, even if you were worth billions. Elon hadn't planned to stay long. He'd made his donation, shaken the right hands, and was already calculating how quickly he could slip out the side exit. These events were always the same. Rich people pretending to care about causes while mostly caring about being seen caring. He checked his phone for the third time in 5 minutes. That's when Viktor Romanov took the stage. Viktor was exactly what you'd picture if someone said world-famous classical pianist. Tall, impeccably dressed with silver hair swept back like he'd just stepped out of a European postcard. His reputation preceded him, 20 years performing in the world's greatest concert halls, recording albums that critics called transcendent, and an ego that could fill Carnegie Hall twice over. The crowd settled into their seats as Viktor adjusted the microphone. He didn't smile. He never smiled before performing. It was part of his mystique. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his accent making every word sound more important than it probably was. "Before I play for you tonight, I want to share something that's been troubling me." A few people glanced at each other. This wasn't the usual introduction. "We live in an age where money can buy almost anything," Viktor continued, his voice dropping lower, more serious. "A yacht, a mansion, a rocket to space." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. But there's one thing money cannot buy. Soul, artistry, the ability to touch another human heart through pure expression. Elon looked up from his phone. Something in Viktor's tone had shifted. "I see so many wealthy men these days, tech billionaires especially, who think because they've mastered code and algorithms, they've mastered life." Viktor's eyes scanned the room and for just a moment seemed to land directly on Elon. They confuse precision with passion, efficiency with emotion. They can build a machine, yes, but can they create beauty? The room had gone completely silent now. This was getting uncomfortable. Several people shifted in their seats. A few executives from Silicon Valley looked down at their plates. Viktor let the silence hang there for a moment before continuing. "Music is not mathematics. It's not a problem to be solved or optimized. It requires something these men often lack: vulnerability, the courage to express what cannot be coded or calculated." One of the event organizers stepped forward, clearly trying to signal Viktor to move on and just play something, but Viktor wasn't finished. "Mr. Musk," he said directly, his voice cutting through the ballroom like a blade. "You're here tonight, aren't you?" Every head in the room turned. Elon sat perfectly still at his table in the back corner, his face showing nothing. "Tell me," Viktor said, "when was the last time you created something purely for beauty? Not for profit, not for efficiency, not to solve a problem, just beauty?" The silence was deafening. Phone cameras were already out recording. This was going to be all over social media within minutes. Elon still didn't move. Didn't react. His business partner next to him leaned over and whispered something, but Elon waved him off. Viktor smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of someone who'd just made his point. "I thought not. That's the difference between us, you see. I create. You calculate." He turned back to the piano. "Enjoy the performance." What followed was technically perfect. Viktor played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a piece so complex and emotionally demanding that most pianists spend years preparing it. His fingers moved across the keys with the kind of precision that only comes from a lifetime of practice. Every note was exactly where it should be. Every dynamic perfectly controlled. The audience erupted in applause. A standing ovation. Viktor bowed gracefully, soaking in the admiration. As he left the stage, he walked past Elon's table without a glance. By the time dessert was served, the video had already gone viral. "Famous pianist calls out Elon Musk at charity gala" was trending on Twitter. The think pieces were already being written. Hot takes were flying. Everyone had an opinion. Some people defended Elon. Viktor was out of line. That was unprofessional. Others piled on. "He's right, though. These tech bros think they're Renaissance men because they can code. Stick to rockets, Elon." The memes started within the hour. Pictures of Elon photoshopped onto a piano bench with captions like, "Error 404, soul not found." Elon left the gala early as planned. but not for the reasons he'd originally intended. His security team was already running interference with reporters outside. "Mr. Musk, any comment on what Viktor Romanov said? Do you play any instruments? Will you respond to his challenge?" Challenge. That's what they were calling it now. As if Viktor had thrown down a gauntlet. In the car on the way home, Elon stared out the window at the passing lights of the city. His phone was exploding with notifications, messages from friends, business associates, even family members who'd seen the videos. "Don't let it get to you," his assistant texted. "The news cycle will move on by tomorrow." But something about Viktor's words had hit differently than the usual criticism. Elon was used to being called ruthless, obsessive, difficult to work with. He'd been accused of not caring about workers, about safety, about everything except his vision. That stuff rolled off his back, but this, the suggestion that he was fundamentally incapable of creating something beautiful, that he lacked the emotional depth to express himself through art, that touched something old, something he hadn't thought about in decades. Because what Viktor Romanov didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that before rockets and electric cars and social media acquisitions, there had been music, not professionally, not publicly, but real nonetheless. When Elon was 9 years old, growing up in Pretoria, South Africa, his mother had insisted he take piano lessons. Not because she thought he'd become a concert pianist, but because she believed every child should learn at least one instrument. "It teaches discipline," she'd said, "and it gives you a way to express things you can't put into words." He'd hated it at first. The endless scales, the finger exercises, the stern teacher who rapped his knuckles when he played wrong notes. But then something had shifted. He'd discovered that when he played, the noise in his head, the constant calculating, planning, problem-solving that never stopped, would quiet down. Just for a little while, he'd gotten good. Not prodigy level, but good enough that his teacher started giving him real pieces to learn. Beethoven, Chopin, and his favorite, a haunting composition called Winter's Thaw by a lesser-known Russian composer. He'd spent months learning that piece, playing it over and over until his fingers moved automatically. But then life had intervened. His parents' divorce, the move to Canada, school bullies, the desperate need to escape into books and computers and anything that made logical sense. The piano had been left behind along with everything else from that earlier life. He hadn't touched a piano in over 30 years. Elon looked at his phone. The video of Viktor's performance had 15 million views already. The comments section was brutal, half defending him, half tearing him apart, but one comment caught his eye. "I'd pay good money to see Elon try to play piano. Would be the most expensive train wreck in history." He smiled, not with amusement, but with something else. Something that felt almost like muscle memory waking up. His assistant sent another message. "PR team wants to schedule a call tomorrow morning. We should craft a response." Elon put the phone down and looked out at the San Francisco skyline. The city was beautiful at night, all lit up like a circuit board. He'd helped build parts of this future. Electric cars on those streets, solar panels on those roofs, satellites connecting it all from space. But could he create beauty? The question bothered him more than it should have. By the time he got home, he'd made a decision. He wasn't going to release a statement. He wasn't going to tweet a clever comeback. He wasn't going to let his PR team handle this. He was going to do something else entirely. Something nobody would expect. Something that scared him more than any rocket launch or business deal ever had. The next morning, Elon canceled his first 3 meetings. His executive assistant knew something was off. He never canceled meetings. Those morning slots were sacred, when his mind was sharpest, when the big decisions got made. "Is everything okay?" she asked carefully. "I need you to find someone for me," he said. "A piano teacher. The best one in the Bay Area. Someone who's worked with advanced students, not beginners." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A piano teacher?" "Yes, and I need a piano delivered to my house today. A good one. I don't care what it costs." By noon, a Steinway grand piano was being carefully maneuvered through his front door by 6 sweating delivery men. By 2 in the afternoon, his assistant had compiled a list of 5 potential teachers. By 3, he'd called the first one. Her name was Helen Chen, 72 years old, retired from teaching at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. According to her biography, She'd trained concert pianists who'd gone on to win international competitions. She didn't teach anymore, she'd told his assistant. She was enjoying her retirement. "I'll pay you $50,000 for 6 weeks of intensive lessons," Elon said when she answered the phone. Helen laughed. "Mr. Musk, I appreciate the offer, but I'm quite comfortable. I don't need—" "This isn't about money," he interrupted. "I need the best teacher available, and from what I've read, that's you. I played piano as a child. I was actually pretty good, but I haven't touched one in over 30 years. I need to remember. And I have 6 weeks to do it." 6 weeks? What's happening in 6 weeks? That's how long until the International Music Festival. Helen was quiet for a moment. "I saw the video. Viktor Romanov at the gala. Everyone saw the video. And you're planning to respond? Publicly? I'm planning to play." Another pause. "Mr. Musk, I don't think you understand what you're suggesting. Viktor Romanov is one of the finest pianists alive today. Even if you were good as a child, 30 years is a long time. Your muscle memory is gone. Your technique will need rebuilding from scratch. 6 weeks isn't enough to—" "Then we'd better not waste any more time talking," Elon said. "Can you be here tomorrow morning at 6? Helen sighed. The kind of sigh that said she was about to agree to something against her better judgment. "What piece are you planning to play?" "Something called Winter's Thaw. I don't remember the composer's full name. Russian, I think. It was my favorite when I was a kid. Tchaikovsky's Winter's Thaw, from his lesser-known compositions. That's it. Mr. Musk, that piece it's not technically the most difficult, but emotionally it's devastating. It requires absolute vulnerability. The pianist has to be willing to expose something raw. If you play it without that honesty, it falls completely flat." "I know," Elon said quietly. "That's why I chose it." The first lesson was humbling in a way Elon hadn't experienced in decades. When you're a billionaire CEO, people don't often tell you that you're terrible at something. They find diplomatic ways to phrase it. They encourage you. They look for silver linings. Helen didn't do any of that. "Your posture is wrong. Your wrist is too high. You're hitting the keys like you're typing. This isn't a computer keyboard. It's an instrument that responds to touch, to weight, to intention." She demonstrated, playing a simple scale that somehow sounded like music instead of just notes. "Feel the difference?" Elon tried again. It sounded marginally better. "Now do it 500 more times." Meanwhile, the internet was having a field day. The news that Elon Musk had requested an invitation to perform at the International Music Festival had leaked within 48 hours. The festival director, probably seeing an opportunity for publicity, had agreed. The announcement went viral immediately. "This is going to be a disaster," one music critic wrote. "Elon Musk is many things, but he's not a pianist. This is like watching someone who played high school football challenge Tom Brady to a Super Bowl." The memes got worse. Videos of cats playing piano with the caption, "Still better than Elon's upcoming performance." Betting pools on how many wrong notes he'd hit. Think pieces about billionaire hubris. Viktor Romanov himself gave an interview to a classical music magazine. "I welcome Mr. Musk's participation," he said with barely concealed condescension. "It takes courage to humiliate yourself on an international stage. Though I'm not sure courage and wisdom always go together." Elon didn't read the comments. He'd learned that lesson years ago. Nothing good ever came from reading what strangers said about you online. But his friends sent him the worst ones anyway, usually with messages like, "Don't let them get to you," or, "You sure about this?" He was sure. Or at least he was committed, which wasn't quite the same thing but would have to be enough. The training was brutal. 6 in the morning until 8 every single day, with Helen showing no mercy. Then a full day of running his companies, board meetings, product reviews, crisis management. Then back to the piano from 9 at night until midnight. His fingers developed calluses. His back ached from sitting on the bench. His brain felt like it was rewiring itself, forming new pathways between memory and movement. "You're forcing it," Helen kept saying. "You're approaching this like a problem to solve. Like if you just work hard enough, analyze it enough, you'll crack the code. But music isn't code. It's not logical. You have to stop thinking and start feeling." "I don't know how to do that," Elon admitted during one particularly frustrating session. "Yes, you do. You did it when you were 9 years old. You just forgot. Or you taught yourself to forget." She played the opening bars of Winter's Thaw. "This piece isn't about winter. It's about the moment winter ends. That first day when you wake up and something's different. The ice is melting. Things that were frozen are starting to move again. It's about hope after a long period of cold. You can't play that if you're thinking about finger placement and tempo. You have to remember what hope feels like. That night, alone in his house, Elon sat at the piano and put his hands on the keys. He didn't try to play anything. He just sat there, feeling the smooth ivory under his fingers, listening to the silence of the empty room. When was the last time he'd felt hope? Real hope, not just confidence in a calculated outcome. He thought about being 9 years old, sitting at a piano in Pretoria playing this same piece. What had he been hoping for back then? He tried to remember. Maybe to be understood, to have some way to express all the thoughts and feelings that didn't fit into normal conversation, to create something that mattered not because it was useful or profitable but because it was beautiful. When had he stopped caring about beauty? His phone buzzed. Another message from his PR team. They'd drafted 3 different statements he could release to manage expectations before the performance. Ways to frame this so if he failed it wouldn't be quite so humiliating. He deleted the message without reading the drafts. 3 weeks into training, something shifted. It happened during a late-night practice session. He'd been playing the same passage over and over, getting the notes right but knowing something was still missing. Helen had gone home hours ago, frustrated with his progress. He closed his eyes and just let go. Stopped thinking about what his fingers were doing. Stopped worrying about the performance. Stopped calculating, and suddenly, just for a few measures, he heard it. The sound he'd been chasing. It didn't sound perfect. It didn't sound like Viktor Romanov's flawless technique. But it sounded honest. His hands were shaking when he stopped playing. Not from nervousness, but from something else. Something he didn't have a name for. He called Helen even though it was almost 1 a.m. "I heard it," he said when she answered. "Just for a moment. I heard what you've been talking about." "Good," she said, sounding not at all surprised by the late-night call. "Now you need to find it again. And again. And again. Until it's not something you find, but something you are." With 3 weeks left until the festival, the videos had reached a fever pitch. Someone had gotten footage of Elon entering and leaving a piano store. Another person claimed to have heard him practicing through a window. Entertainment reporters were staked outside venues trying to get information. Viktor Romanov announced he would also be performing at the festival. "I look forward to representing the art form properly," he told reporters. Before and after the, shall we say, intermission. The festival organizers, sensing they had the event of the decade on their hands, announced that both performances would be streamed live. Over 1 million people had already registered to watch. Elon tried not to think about that number. Tried not to think about all those people waiting to watch him fail. Tried not to think about Victor's smug smile or the endless memes or the fact that he was about to either vindicate himself or become the world's most expensive punchline. He just focused on the next note. Then the next. Then the next. Helen watched him during their final lesson before the festival, her expression unreadable. When he finished playing through Winter's Thaw, she was silent for a long moment. "Well?" he asked. "You're going to surprise a lot of people," she said finally. "Is that good or bad?" She smiled. "I guess we'll find out in 3 days." The Davies Symphony Hall in San Francisco had never seen anything like this. The International Music Festival was usually an elegant affair, attended by classical music lovers, wealthy patrons, and critics who'd spent their lives studying the art form. This year the crowd was completely different. Tech journalists sat next to music critics. Venture capitalists in expensive suits mixed with conservatory professors in blazers with elbow patches. Social media influencers were live streaming from their seats. The audience was split almost 50-50 between people who loved classical music and people who'd never attended a classical concert in their lives. Outside, protesters held signs. Some supported Elon. Let the man play. Others were there for the spectacle. Train wreck loading. The ticket prices had skyrocketed. A seat that normally cost $200 was selling for $3,000 on resale sites. Backstage, Viktor Romanov was in his dressing room warming up. He could hear the buzz of the crowd through the walls. This was what he lived for. The anticipation, the attention, the knowledge that he was about to demonstrate mastery that few humans could match. He'd chosen his piece carefully. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. If Musk thought Winter's Thaw was impressive, this would show him what real virtuosity looked like. 3 doors down, Elon sat alone in a smaller dressing room. Helen had wanted to stay with him, to give last-minute advice and encouragement, but he'd asked her to leave an hour ago. He needed silence, needed to find that place inside himself that he'd accessed during practice, where the noise stopped and only the music remained. His phone was off. He'd told his assistant not to disturb him unless the building was literally on fire. The last thing he'd seen before powering it down was a text from one of his kids. "You've got this. Dad, proud of you no matter what happens." That had almost broken his composure. The festival director knocked on his door. "Mr. Musk? We're starting in 15 minutes. Victor will perform first as planned, then there's a brief intermission, and then you're on." "Got it," Elon said. "There are, a lot of people watching. The live stream numbers are already at 2 million and climbing, just so you're prepared. Thanks." After the director left, Elon stood and walked to the small upright piano in the corner of the dressing room. He placed his hands on the keys and played through the opening of Winter's Thaw. His fingers knew what to do now. 6 weeks of practice had given him that much. But would they remember when he walked out onto that stage in front of millions of people? He thought about what Helen had said during their final lesson. At some point, you have to trust yourself. You can't think your way through this. You have to let the music flow through you like water. If you try to control every drop, you'll lose the river. The lights dimmed in the concert hall. The crowd settled into their seats. The festival director walked to the center of the stage, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this year's International Music Festival. Tonight we have a very special program. First, we're honored to present one of the world's finest pianists, a virtuoso who has graced the stages of Vienna, Moscow, Tokyo, and beyond. Please welcome Victor Romanov." The applause was thunderous. Victor walked onto the stage like he owned it, his silver hair catching the spotlight. He didn't smile or wave. He simply bowed once precisely and sat at the grand piano centered on stage. The hall went completely silent. What happened next was a masterclass in technical perfection. Victor's fingers flew across the keys with inhuman speed. The notes poured out like water, each one crisp and clear. The Rachmaninoff piece was absurdly difficult. Cascading runs, enormous leaps, passages that required the pianist's hands to move independently with different rhythms. Victor made it look effortless. In the audience, the music critics nodded appreciatively. This was what they'd come for. This was artistry at the highest level, but something was missing. One reviewer would later write, "It was like watching a Swiss watch perform. Precise, beautiful, and utterly predictable. Every note exactly where it should be, every dynamic perfectly calculated. But where was the humanity? Where was the risk?" But most of the audience didn't notice. They were too busy being amazed by the technical display. When Victor finished, the final notes ringing through the hall, the crowd erupted. A standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Victor bowed 3 times, his face showing satisfaction. As he walked off stage, he glanced toward the wing where Elon would be waiting. The message was clear. Follow that. The intermission felt like it lasted forever. People rushed to the bathrooms, refreshed their drinks, checked their phones. Social media was exploding. Victor was absolutely perfect. How is Musk going to compete with that? This is going to be painful to watch. I actually feel bad for him. He's about to be humiliated in front of the entire world. Plot twist, what if he's actually good? That last comment got ratioed immediately. The consensus was clear. This was going to be a disaster. Backstage, Elon stood in the wing watching the stagehands reset for his performance. The Steinway grand piano looked enormous under the lights. He could hear the crowd filing back to their seats, the murmur of thousands of conversations. Helen appeared beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there in solidarity. "He was good," Elon said quietly. "He was technically perfect," Helen corrected. "But perfection isn't always the same as greatness. Remember what I told you? This isn't a competition about who hits the most notes correctly. It's about who tells the truth. And if my truth isn't good enough, then at least you tried. How many people can say they stood in front of the world and showed who they really are? That takes more courage than building any rocket." The festival director appeared. "Mr. Musk, we're ready for you." Elon nodded. Helen squeezed his shoulder once, then stepped back. As he walked toward the stage entrance, the crowd noise changed. The murmur became louder, anticipatory. He could hear laughter mixed with applause. Some people were genuinely curious. Others were there for the spectacle, the meme, the moment they could tell their friends about. The director walked back to center stage. The crowd settled again. And now, the director said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that probably wasn't intentional, "Please welcome entrepreneur and innovator Elon Musk." The applause was different than it had been for Victor. Louder in some ways, but also mixed with other sounds. Whoops and hollers from the tech crowd. Nervous laughter from others. A few scattered boos that got quickly shushed. Elon walked onto the stage. The lights were brighter than he'd expected. Hotter. He couldn't see individual faces in the audience. Just a dark mass of humanity stretching back into the shadows. Somewhere out there, millions more were watching through screens. His kids, his friends, his critics. People who'd spent weeks creating memes about this moment. He didn't wave. Didn't smile. He just walked to the piano bench and sat down. The hall went silent. Not the respectful silence that had greeted Victor, but something else. An expectant silence. The kind of silence that comes before something either amazing or terrible happens. Elon adjusted the bench, placed his hands on the keys, and then paused. This was the moment. Everything in his life had led to this single point in time. All the success, all the criticism, all the noise, it all came down to what happened in the next few minutes. He thought about being 9 years old, alone in a recital hall with just a janitor in the back, playing not for applause or recognition, but because the music needed to exist, because he needed to express something that had no words. He thought about Helen's words. Let the music flow through you. He thought about winter ending, about ice melting, about hope, and then he stopped thinking entirely. His fingers touched the keys and the first note of winter's thaw filled the hall. It wasn't perfect. His hand trembled slightly on the opening chord. The note hung in the air for just a fraction too long before the melody began, but it was honest. The second phrase came more smoothly. His fingers remembered the patterns they'd practiced 10,000 times over the past 6 weeks. But more than that, they remembered something older. Something from 30 years ago when music had been his refuge from a world that didn't make sense. The piece began to unfold. Not like Victor's performance, there were small imperfections, moments where the technique wasn't quite flawless. But there was something else. Something raw and real that hadn't been there in Victor's perfect execution. In the audience, people began to lean forward. The critics stopped taking notes. The tech journalists forgot to tweet. Even the people who'd come to watch a disaster found themselves caught by something they hadn't expected. This wasn't a billionaire playing piano. This was a human being telling a story about loss and hope and the courage it takes to feel anything at all. Elon's eyes were closed now. He wasn't thinking about the audience anymore. Wasn't thinking about Victor or the critics or the live stream numbers. He was inside the music, letting it pour through him. The piece built toward its climax. The moment where winter finally breaks and spring begins. His hands moved faster, the notes cascading like ice melting into water. And then the resolution, the final phrase that said, "It's okay. The cold is over. You can feel again." When the last note faded into silence, Elon's hands remained on the keys for a moment. His eyes were still closed. The hall was absolutely silent. And then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. That single clap echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Then another person joined. Then another. And then, like a wave building from the back of the room, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause wasn't polite or measured like it had been for Victor. It was messy, emotional, real. People weren't just clapping. They were reacting to something they'd felt. Something they hadn't expected to feel at all. Elon opened his eyes, blinking against the stage lights. For a moment, he looked almost confused, as if he'd forgotten where he was. He stood slowly, legs unsteady, and bowed. Not the practiced bow of a professional performer, but the awkward nod of someone who wasn't used to this kind of vulnerability. The applause continued. 5 minutes, 7, 10. People in the audience were wiping their eyes. A woman in the third row was openly crying, though she probably couldn't have explained why. In the wings, Helen stood with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. In 30 years of teaching, she'd seen hundreds of performances. But this one would stay with her forever. Backstage, in his dressing room, Viktor Romanov heard the applause. At first, he assumed it was just charity applause, the kind people give when someone tries hard but falls short. But as the minutes ticked by and the sound didn't fade, his expression changed. He walked to his door and opened it slightly, listening. That wasn't charity applause. That was genuine reaction, the kind that couldn't be faked or manufactured. Something he hadn't felt in years began to stir in his chest. Something uncomfortable that felt almost like doubt. When Elon finally left the stage, the crowd was still standing. The festival director had to practically pull him into the wings because he seemed frozen, unable to process what was happening. Mr. Musk, that was... I don't have words, the director stammered. In 20 years of running this festival, I've never seen... But Elon wasn't listening. He was looking past the director to where Victor stood, still in his performance tuxedo, watching from the shadows. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then Victor did something no one expected. He walked forward and extended his hand. You felt it, Victor said quietly, not as a question but as a statement. Elon shook his hand, still too overwhelmed to form words. When I was your age, when I first learned this music, I felt it too, Victor continued. His accent seemed thicker now, less polished. Somewhere along the way I forgot. I became so focused on being perfect that I stopped being honest. He paused, his jaw tightening. You reminded me of something tonight. Something important. Your performance was technically perfect, Elon finally managed to say. Yes, and it was empty. Victor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I heard it even as I was playing. Every note exactly right and every note exactly wrong. Do you understand? Elon nodded slowly. He understood perfectly. Outside in the lobby, chaos had erupted. People were on their phones, posting videos, sharing reactions. The live stream had peaked at over 5 million viewers. Social media was melting down, but this time in a completely different way. I came here to watch a train wreck, and instead I'm crying in a concert hall. What just happened? Okay, I'll admit it. I was wrong. That was actually beautiful. Victor's performance was technically superior, but Elon's made me feel something. I don't even know how to process this. The music critics were having existential crises in real time. Their carefully prepared reviews, the ones they'd written in their heads during Victor's performance, praising technical mastery and precise execution, suddenly felt inadequate. One respected critic for the San Francisco Chronicle sat in his seat long after most people had left, staring at his empty notepad. He'd been reviewing classical performances for 30 years. He thought he knew what made music good or bad, what separated the professionals from the amateurs. Tonight had shattered something in his understanding. He finally wrote, Sometimes the most profound performances come not from those who've mastered the instrument, but from those who've mastered themselves. In the back of the hall, an elderly woman remained seated as the crowd filtered out. She was dressed simply and no one recognized her, which was exactly what she preferred. Her name was Ruth Ivanov, and she'd been a piano teacher in San Francisco for 50 years before retiring a decade ago. She'd taught Viktor Romanov when he was 16. Fresh from Russia, burning with ambition and talent, she'd seen him transform from a passionate young musician into a technical master. And she'd watched heartbroken as the passion slowly drained away, replaced by perfection. Tonight, watching this billionaire tech CEO play with raw, unpolished emotion, she'd seen what Victor had lost. And she'd seen Victor standing in the wings watching too, seeing it in his face, the recognition, the regret, the awakening. She stood slowly, her old knees protesting, and made her way backstage. Security tried to stop her, but she had ways of being persistent when she wanted to be. She found both men in the same hallway, still talking quietly. They looked up as she approached. Victor, she said simply. His eyes widened. Ms. Ruth? What are you doing here? I come every year. I just usually leave before anyone notices me. She looked between the two men. Tonight was special. It was a disaster, Victor said, though his tone suggested he didn't quite believe that anymore. I was shown up by an amateur. You weren't shown up. You were reminded. Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. Do you remember the first time I heard you play? You were 16. You'd just arrived in America. Your English was terrible. Your clothes didn't fit right and you had no money. But when you played, everyone in the room stopped breathing. Victor looked away, uncomfortable. You played like someone who'd experienced loss and hope and fear and joy. Every note meant something. You played like your life depended on it because in many ways it did. She paused. When did you stop playing like that? When I realized that emotion doesn't win competitions, Victor said quietly. Perfection does. Consistency does. Technical mastery does. And has it made you happy? All those competitions you won? Victor didn't answer. Ruth turned to Elon. I don't know you, Mr. Musk. I don't follow technology or business news. But I know music. And I know what I heard tonight. You played like someone who was afraid to feel but who felt anyway. That's the bravest thing an artist can do. I'm not an artist, Elon said automatically. Tonight you were. She smiled. We all were. Even those of us just listening. Helen appeared then, pushing through the backstage crowd that had formed. She was breathless, her eyes still red. There you are. Elon, the media wants interviews, the festival director wants photos, and I think the mayor is looking for you. Can it wait? Elon asked, I suppose. But there are literally hundreds of people. Tell them I'll be available in an hour. He looked at Victor, then at Ruth. Right now, I want to understand what just happened. The four of them found an empty rehearsal room away from the chaos. Someone had left coffee in a thermos and they passed around paper cups like they were sharing something sacred. I need to tell you something, Victor said, looking at Elon. That gala 6 weeks ago, when I challenged you publicly, I remember. I did it because I was jealous. The words came out like a confession. You've built companies that changed the world. You've achieved things I can't even imagine, and yet people still wanted to know if you could play piano, as if that mattered, as if my entire life of dedication to this art form could be matched by some billionaire taking a few lessons. I understand that, Elon said. But here's what I didn't understand until tonight. You didn't try to match me. You didn't try to be technically perfect or prove you were as good as me. You just told the truth. You played honestly, and that's something I haven't done in 20 years. Victor stood and walked to the upright piano in the corner of the room. He sat down, his hands hovering over the keys. May I? He asked. Of course, Ruth said. What Victor played next wasn't Rachmaninoff or any of the flashy, technically demanding pieces he was famous for. It was a simple folk melody, something he'd learned as a child in Russia. His hands moved slowly, carefully, finding not just the notes but the meaning behind them. It was rough in places. There were a few wrong notes. His technique, usually flawless, was deliberately restrained, but it was beautiful. When he finished, tears were running down his face. I forgot this song existed, he whispered. My grandmother taught it to me. She couldn't read music. She just played from her heart. Helen was crying again. Ruth was smiling. Elon sat quietly, processing everything. Music isn't about being the best, Ruth said finally. It's about being honest. Both of you remembered that tonight. In different ways. Outside the rehearsal room, they could still hear the noise of the festival winding down. Journalists shouting questions. Camera flashes. The constant buzz of social media speculation. But in this small room, 4 people sat in silence, understanding something that couldn't be captured in videos or reviews or trending hashtags. Sometimes the most important performances are the ones that change the performer, not just the audience. Victor stood slowly. Mr. Musk, I owe you an apology. A public one. You don't. I do. What I said at the gala was cruel and small-minded. I tried to humiliate you because I felt threatened. That's not who I want to be. Elon considered this. And I owe you thanks. If you hadn't challenged me, I would never have rediscovered something I thought I'd lost forever. They shook hands again, and this time it felt different. Not like rivals, but like 2 people who'd shared something rare and honest. As they finally prepared to face the waiting media and the aftermath of the evening, Ruth stopped them one more time. Remember this feeling, she said. Both of you. Success and fame and recognition, they're all empty if you lose yourself in the process. Tonight you both found something real. Don't lose it again. The press conference that followed was unlike any either man had experienced before. Usually these events were stiff and formal. Prepared statements, carefully managed questions, controlled responses. This one felt more like a conversation. They sat together at a table, Victor and Elon looking oddly comfortable despite having been rivals just hours earlier. The room was packed with journalists, cameras, and people streaming live to millions watching around the world. Mr. Romanov, a reporter from the New York Times, started. You've said in the past that classical music requires years of dedicated study. Do you still believe that after tonight? Victor leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. I believe great music requires honesty. Sometimes that comes after years of study. Sometimes it comes from someone who's willing to be vulnerable in front of the world. Tonight, Mr. Musk taught me that I'd confuse technical mastery with artistic truth. That's a lesson worth more than any competition I've ever won. A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the Victor Romanov they knew, the one who spoke with certainty about what was and wasn't art. Mr. Musk, another reporter called out. You spent 6 weeks preparing for this performance. What was the hardest part? Elon thought for a moment. Learning to stop thinking. I'm used to solving problems logically, breaking them down into components, optimizing each piece. Music doesn't work that way. The hardest part was accepting that some things can't be calculated or predicted. You just have to feel them and trust that's enough. Are you planning to perform again? No, Elon said, and there was something final in his tone. This was never about becoming a pianist. It was about remembering something I'd lost. Now that I've found it again, I don't need to prove it to anyone else. Not even once more, the reporter pressed. Elon smiled slightly. Music doesn't exist to be performed. It exists to be experienced. I'll keep playing, but probably just for myself. Or maybe for my kids when they're having a hard day and need to hear something honest. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. But the most memorable moment came at the end when a young music student raised her hand. I have a question for both of you, she said nervously. I'm studying piano at the conservatory and I feel so much pressure to be perfect. Every note has to be exactly right. Every performance has to be flawless. After tonight, I'm confused. What matters more, perfection or honesty? Victor and Elon looked at each other and something passed between them. An understanding. Both matter, Victor said finally. But honesty comes first. Perfect technique without emotion is just noise. Emotion without technique is chaos. The goal is to develop enough skill that the technique disappears, and all that's left is the truth you're trying to express. He paused. I forgot that for a while. Don't make my mistake. The video of that exchange would be watched by over 50 million people in the following weeks. Music schools around the world would use it in their classes. The conversation about what made art meaningful shifted in ways that neither man could have predicted. In the days that followed, something strange happened. The story stopped being about whether Elon could play piano or whether Victor was still relevant. It became about something bigger, about what happens when we let ourselves be vulnerable, when we choose honesty over image, when we remember why we fell in love with something in the first place. A famous film director announced he was shelving his latest big-budget project to make something smaller and more personal. A tech CEO wrote an essay about how he'd lost sight of why he'd started his company, too focused on growth metrics and stock prices. A politician admitted he'd been saying what focus groups told him to say, rather than what he actually believed. None of them mentioned Elon or Victor by name. But the timing wasn't coincidental. 2 weeks after the performance, Elon returned to Helen's house for one final lesson, except it wasn't really a lesson anymore. I wanted to thank you properly, he said, handing her an envelope. She opened it and laughed. Inside was a check for exactly $0 with paid in full written in the memo line. The $50,000 wasn't enough? She asked. The money was never the point. You gave me something more valuable. He sat at her piano, the same one where he'd struggled through those early lessons. You reminded me that some things matter more than success. And what are you going to do with that reminder? Elon played a few notes, the opening to Winter's Thaw. I'm not sure yet, but I know I'm going to make different decisions. Ask different questions. When I'm designing something new, I want to ask not just, does this work? But is this beautiful? Not in an aesthetic sense, but in a deeper way. Does it express something true? Helen smiled. You know, in all my years of teaching, I've had students go on to win competitions, perform at Carnegie Hall, record albums. But I think you might be my greatest success. I'm barely competent compared to, you learned what music is actually for. That's rarer than you think. Meanwhile, Victor's life was changing too. He canceled his next 3 performances, prestigious concerts at major venues that he'd been scheduled for months. His agent nearly had a heart attack. Do you understand what you're turning down? The agent pleaded. These are the biggest stages in the world. The fees alone. I need time to remember how to play, Victor said simply. You're one of the greatest pianists alive. You know how to play. No, I know how to perform. That's different. He spent the next month doing something he hadn't done in decades, playing just for himself. No audience, no critics, no pressure. He revisited pieces he'd learned as a child, simple melodies that didn't require virtuoso technique. He played wrong notes and didn't care. He experimented with interpretations that would make purists cringe, and slowly, something that had been frozen inside him began to thaw. Ruth visited him one afternoon and found him playing the same 4-bar phrase over and over. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "The feeling I had when I first learned this piece. I was 17. I'd just lost someone important. This music helped me process that grief, but somewhere along the way I forgot the grief and just remembered the notes." He played the phrase again, and this time it sounded different. Rawer. "There it is." Ruth sat down next to him on the bench. "You know, the great tragedy of becoming an expert is that you forget what it's like to be a beginner, to struggle, to fail, to discover." That tech CEO remembered because he'd been away from music long enough to come back to it fresh. "And I forgot because I never left." Exactly. So maybe the answer isn't to leave entirely, but to approach it new each time, to play like you're discovering it for the first time, even if you've played it 1,000 times before. 6 months later, Victor gave his comeback performance. He didn't announce it in advance. Didn't sell tickets. Just showed up at a small community center in Oakland where kids were learning music, and asked if he could play for them. The performance was recorded on someone's phone and uploaded to YouTube. Within days, it had more views than any of his professionally produced concert videos. In the recording, you can see Victor sitting at a beat-up upright piano, surrounded by kids ranging from 6 to 16. He plays Chopin, Beethoven, some jazz, some folk music. He makes mistakes. He laughs when his fingers slip. He stops to explain what he's feeling as he plays certain passages. One little girl asks him, "Are you famous?" "I used to think I was," he answers. "Now I'm just someone who loves music." The video ends with him and the kids playing Happy Birthday for one student's celebration. It's chaotic and messy and slightly off-key. It's also the most joyful thing Victor Romanov had done in 20 years. As for Elon, he never performed publicly again. But people who worked closely with him noticed changes. He was less rigid, more willing to admit when he didn't know something. When SpaceX had a rocket failure, instead of immediately jumping to problem-solving mode, he took a moment to acknowledge the disappointment, the human cost of setbacks. In interviews, when asked about his biggest accomplishment, he started mentioning that piano performance alongside launching rockets and building electric cars, not because it was technically impressive, but because it represented something important: the courage to be imperfect in public, to prioritize truth over image. His kids noticed too. One evening, his daughter found him at the piano in their house playing something she didn't recognize. "What's that?" she asked. "Something I'm making up. It's probably not very good. Can you teach me?" He made room on the bench and she sat down. They played together, making mistakes, laughing, finding notes that sounded good together. Outside, the California sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that no algorithm could predict or formula could capture. Inside, a father and daughter were creating something that would never be recorded or performed or reviewed. But it was beautiful anyway. And maybe that was the whole point. Years later, when people asked Victor about that night at the festival, he always said the same thing. "I performed better technically, but he played better humanly. And in the end, that's what matters." When people asked Elon, he smiled and said, "Sometimes you have to lose to win. I lost the competition for technical perfection. But I won something more important. I found a part of myself I thought was gone forever." The story of that night became legend in both classical music circles and the tech world. But more than that, it became a reminder that excellence without humanity is just performance, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to be vulnerable when the world is watching. The real victory wasn't in the applause or the media, attention, or even the personal growth both men experienced. It was in the reminder that we're all more than our accomplishments. That success means nothing if we lose ourselves in the pursuit of it, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply be honest with others, with the world, and most importantly, with ourselves. The piano Elon had delivered to his house 6 weeks before the performance stayed. It found a permanent place in his living room, He played it most mornings now, before the demands of the day took over. Sometimes he played Winter's Thaw. Sometimes he just improvised, following whatever feeling wanted to be expressed. He never got technically better than he was that night at the festival, but he got more honest. And in the end, that was always what mattered most.